For many years now, I've used the same approach every fall to prep our fallow garden beds for winter, and I've never spent a penny doing it. Today I'll show you how. Every fall I mulch our annual beds where we're not growing winter crops with a heavy blanket of free autumn leaves. I also mulch our perennials with wood chips, and I apply some wood chips to our walking paths if the mulch is getting thin there. I'd also use straw if I had a free local source for it. All of these mulches feed the soil, provide habitat and food for soil organisms, and they provide a protective blanket that helps soil organisms thrive over the winter, including earthworms. Let's get started by mulching our annual beds with autumn leaves. Every autumn we collect leaves from our neighbors that they would otherwise have to pay the city to haul away. We used to compost some and then use the rest as mulch, but now because our soil is so rich in nutrients, we only use them as mulch. This way the nutrients are released more slowly as the leaves break down gradually. Some of the leaves we collect are shredded, but others like these aren't. And I don't go to the trouble of shredding them myself, because even a thick layer of leaves like this will be completely gone by June. The reason these leaves will break down so quickly is that our soil is full of life. The fungi, earthworms, and other beneficial soil organisms will have no trouble devouring these leaves, and there'll be barely a sign of them by next June. And that may vary depending on where you live and how much soil life you have. And of course, one of the reasons there is so much soil life in our garden is because we mulch with leaves. In the spring, I'll temporarily brush aside the leaves when I'm planting intensively planted close-spaced crops like carrots and beets, and then I'll return the mulch once the plants are established. For larger plants, I'll just leave the leaves in place. Okay, I've covered this bed with a good 4 inches or more of leaves. I may apply more later when these settle down a bit. A good time to apply a lot of leaves is right before you start getting heavy snowfall. That way they won't blow away. Now let's move on to the next bed. In addition to not shredding leaves, we also don't bury them or turn them into the soil in any way. Instead, we just apply them to the soil surface. Sometimes there are pine needles mixed in with our leaves, but that's perfectly fine because they won't make the soil more acidic and they won't harm plants at all. In fact, pine needles are also a good mulch. Also, leaves, including oak leaves, won't make your soil acidic. And if you see a little bit of fungus on the leaves, that's nothing to worry about because that's a natural part of the decomposition process. The only leaf around here that I would avoid using a lot of is black walnut, because black walnut is allelopathic, which means it suppresses the growth of other plants. But even that effect wears off after decomposition. Another reason to mulch with leaves is that they improve soil structure. They make the soil really soft and friable. You may have seen in my videos that I can just reach my hand deep into the soil without using any tools. And to give you an idea of how soft the soil can be, years ago we had some friends over to harvest some crops to bring home and enjoy. And one of them didn't realize you're not supposed to step on the beds, and she did. And she sunk in almost all the way to her knee. And it took 2 of us to pull her back out of the soil. And then it left her shoe in the hole, so we had to go recover that. And one final point about leaves is that they're rich in essential and beneficial elements that are needed by plants. In fact, a few years ago when I was doing the rock dust field trials with Stephen Legary from Alberta Urban Garden, he sent 5 different leaf samples to a lab, along with 2 different well-known rock dust brands to have them analyzed for elements. The lab results showed that autumn leaves compare very favorably to rock dust in terms of essential and beneficial elements, and they have fewer harmful elements like lead, arsenic, and aluminum. So if you want to make sure that you have enough trace elements in your soil, I highly recommend using leaves instead of rock dust. You'll get the trace elements and you won't have to spend the money. For a more in-depth analysis of the lab results, please see this link. Now let's move on to wood chips. Wood chip mulch has many of the same benefits as leaf mulch, but there's nothing better than wood chips at encouraging the development of native mycorrhizal fungi in your garden, which is a big deal. We've also found that the habitat provided by wood chips has led to an increase in our ground beetle population. Ground beetles prey on slugs, and with the increased population of ground beetles in the garden, we have almost no slugs now. Now, we don't apply wood chip mulch to the paths every fall, but we grow King Stropharia mushrooms and wood chips all over the garden. And the mulch is getting a little bit thin. And I want to make sure we have enough mulch to grow our mushrooms, because they grow in the walking paths as well. The use of wood chips as mulch is well supported by science. In fact, science has debunked many long-standing myths about wood chips. For example, wood chips are not allelopathic. They don't transfer diseases to the garden typically. They won't make your soil acidic, and they don't attract termites and carpenter ants. But rather than getting into all of those today, I'll provide a link in the description to an article summarizing many of the myths about wood chips that have been debunked by science. We get all of our wood chips for free from our city's forestry department. When they trim trees or cut trees down, they chip the trees and collect them into a wood chip pile and make those wood chips available to the public. If you don't have something like that, you can often get free wood chips from an arborist, so just try calling a local arborist. Or if you live in the United States, there's a service called Chip Drop that can hook you up with an arborist to arrange for a delivery of wood chips. I've included a link to this service in the description below. Now let's rake out these wood chips, and then I'll show you how I apply them to perennials as well. As I mentioned earlier, we also mulch most of our perennials with wood chips. This includes grapes, blackberries, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, and of course our fruit trees. In fact, we don't use any fertilizers at all on any of these perennials. We only use wood chip mulch. One final point I wanted to make is that when people see how good the soil looks in our walking paths, they often ask me if I dig that soil out and add it to our garden beds to increase the fertility in our garden beds. And the answer is no. The reason is I'm not trying to create individual islands of fertility in the garden. Instead, I view the garden as a whole, and I want the whole garden to be fertile. And one good reason not to dig up the walking paths is that mycorrhizal fungi run throughout the garden, including in the walking paths, and I don't want to disturb them. Mycorrhizal fungi mine nutrients and moisture from the soil and share it among the plants. So if I were to dig up a walking path, I'd be disrupting that network, and I'd be harming the fertility of the garden as a whole. Well, I hope you enjoyed joining me today. This mulch is going to make sure that our soil is teeming with life and that it's fertile. And it will provide a nice warm blanket to protect our earthworms and other soil organisms over the winter. And all of these benefits come without having to spend a penny. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more videos on how to grow a lot of food on a little land without spending much or working harder than you have to. There you are. Come inside, buddy. Oh, good boy. Yeah. All right, let's go in the house. Oh, good boy. Good sweetie.